Well, I finally got my notes together for the Fuji XS10. So let's begin. Page 1.
Well, working 3 jobs, living out of a car. Mama never told me life would get this hard. Running around the world playing my guitar. Baby, you can love me, you can leave me, I'm a honky-tonk star.
Today we're going to be shooting with the A6400 and the Lumix G9. On the G9 today though, I'm going to use the manual focus tethered with my cell phone, and we'll see how that looks. That should cut out all the back and forth in the video. Hopefully it will, but when we're editing, we'll check out the lot behind me there and see if it's any better. It shouldn't be any at all, but how will everything be in focus at the end of the video? I don't know. This is the first time I've ever used this particular function in the camera, so hopefully it works out good. So let's start off with one thing. I'm not a camera review person, okay? I like to use cameras and I like to give my opinions on cameras, but I'm not necessarily the right one for a review. There's so many different channels on the internet that go through all the specifications and all the different things regarding these cameras. If you want something more in depth, I would advise you to go to those channels and check those out. I'm just gonna give you a kind of an overall view and what I like and don't like. Number one, the XS10 is a great camera, I believe, but it's not a pro camera. So what I mean by that, there's no weather sealing, there's not a lot of customizable buttons, and there's a few things on this camera that were left off, obviously to cut cost. So if you hear anybody talking about how this camera doesn't have this camera doesn't have that, that's because that's not what this camera is meant to be. This camera is meant to be a starter's camera, a beginner's camera, something that's easy to use. You don't have to think about it very much, and you'll still get good results with it. So if you keep that in mind while you're watching reviews and stuff online, and even when I'm telling you about it, if you keep in mind who this camera is meant for and what this camera was designed to do, you'll see that it's a really great camera for what it is. We'll start off with the positives about this camera. And the number one thing about this camera is the autofocus. While the autofocus is not on par with a Sony or Canon level autofocus, it is way better than the like a Panasonic or a camera of that nature. The eye detect works okay in both video and photo modes. The only thing that I wish it had as far as a focus goes is a tracking mode. And that's something that I've gotten used to using Sony cameras over the years, is the tracking mode that, you know, stays with your subject. You just push it on the screen and it stays with the subject. This camera doesn't have that. You have to kind of make sure that you're aware of that before you buy the camera. But overall, I think that the autofocus is adequate enough to make a good travel camera, a good day-to-day camera. But again, it's not professional level autofocus. Okay, now let's talk about the stabilization. The stabilization, to me, is good enough. It's kind of like the autofocus. The stabilization is not on the level of a pro camera, and it's not great, but it's better than no stabilization at all. If you're just out walking around taking videos and photos, the stabilization is going to come in really handy. It's not going to keep your shots perfectly still. It's not going to let you do super long exposures, but it is there. You can tell it's there, and it's nice to have in the camera. I'll do a whole nother separate video on stabilization, but from what I can tell you, at least in video, that the stabilization for this camera looks natural. When you're just using the stabilization, the in-body image stabilization that's in the camera, it looks natural and it looks fine. You could get away with walking around with it, vlogging with it, and everything else. It's not going to look that bad. Another thing I like about this camera is the film simulations. Now, I've never used a Fuji camera system before, so the film simulations are kind of new to me, so I'm still kind of getting used to which one to use in each situation. If you're shooting in RAW, you can, on the playback menu, go through, choose the different film simulations, and export it to JPEG, and then you'll have that one. Then you can review them all and see which ones you like's better. Speaking from somebody that's kind of watched Fuji cameras and considered buying Fuji camera in the past, some of the things that kept me off buying a Fuji camera were all the dials on top. That's not something that I personally would like in a camera. It looks cool, and I'm sure it gives you very fine controls. But for me personally, that's kept me off of buying Fuji cameras in the past. This one just has a couple of simple dials, on and off switch. It's a more familiar to me. And personally, that's one of the reasons I was drawn to this particular camera. Also, the grip is much deeper, and I really like that. The previous Fuji camera just kind of had like a little hump or whatever. I could be wrong, and I probably am, but it seems like to me if you get a very heavy lens on that, shooting all day with it could be problematic and it could really tire your hand out. So I like a deeper grip with my cameras. For instance, my favorite grips of all time is on the G9 and also on the Canon EOS R. So I like a nice deep grip on my cameras. So this one really does fit good. I can't fit all my fingers quite on there, but I feel like I have a nice grip on the camera. I can carry it around like this, no problem at all. Yeah, I do like that about the camera. As far as the lens on this goes, I started out with a 16 to 80 kit lens that you can buy with it. And I think this is a really good starter lens. I mean, I think this is probably one of the best starter lenses in the APS-C line across all the manufacturers. I think this is a really good lens. It's small. Now, you'll have people online that tell you it's soft in the corners and it's soft at 80 millimeters, and that's probably true. But as far as an overall kit lens for an APS-C camera, I think that this is one of the best that you can get. Another one of the things that I really, really like about this camera is the slow motion options. I like shooting stuff in slow-mo. I think it's fun and adds interest to the video. Now, it shoots in 120 frames per second and also in 240 frames per second. I think it's really cool. You can get some really cool shots. I went around the campus the other day and took some 240 shots. Now, I mean, you're going to get a little bit of less quality with the 240 than the 120, but I think the coolness factor is definitely worth checking that out. And I really find that it's something neat to have on a camera. Okay, so that's it for the positives of the camera. Now, when I go into the negatives of the camera, there's a few, okay? But that doesn't necessarily mean that I think this camera is a bad camera. I think it's a great camera for what it is, and I think it would make an excellent, maybe the best travel camera that you can get. So when I'm listing these negatives, keep in mind that my overall opinion of this camera is very high. The first negative, and the one that probably drives me crazy the most, is it has 4 different custom modes on the dial, C1 through 4. But you can't use them for video modes, which is super frustrating, and I often wonder why they would do that. For me, when I'm shooting photos, I pretty much just use aperture priority mode, and that's the way I like to shoot. So I don't need a custom mode for any of my pictures, portraits or anything like that. And then if I want to catch something with a higher shutter speed, I'll change it over to shutter speed and up the shutter speed. And so for me, the way I like to shoot photos is A and S in the A aperture mode and S shutter mode. And those two right there cover basically how I like to shoot. But I tell you what, it would be super, super nice if we could put videos on these custom modes. No, you could have one at 30 or 24 frames per second, just for normal shooting, 4K. You could set one at 60 frames per second for full HD, if that's what you like to do. You could set one at 120 and 240. I mean, you could set both of your slow motions there at the same time. So it'd be super nice if they would allow you to use the custom function settings on this dial for video. And it's really frustrating to me that they won't let you do that, or it's not allowed in this camera. Another one of the things that I've noticed while I'm using this camera is kind of a weird exposure settings and exposure changes on the movie mode specifically, but sometimes also on when I'm taking photos. So I'll show you a little bit of the footage of what I'm talking about. And what I was using on this particular shoot, or when I was taking this particular shot, is I was using I was in manual, and I had the shutter speed and the aperture locked down, and I had an auto ISO on. I got to reviewing the footage, and then I kind of noticed that it was going from black to light, dark to light, dark to light, dark to light, like just pulsing in and out. It's really strange. I've never seen anything like that before. So what I wound up having to do is go into manual ISO and set my ISO, and then that kind of stopped that. But I thought that was weird that it was just going in and out as far as the dark to light on the exposure metering. And also it's done this on some portraits as well. When I was taking some pictures around campus, like I would take one shot and it would be pretty dark, and then I would take another shot and it would be kind of it would be too bright, which is, it's kind of weird. It's like the metering mode for the exposure is too sensitive, but I don't know that there's a way to calm that down at all. I don't believe there is in camera. But my last complaint about that is the SD card is also in the battery slot. And I don't even mind that necessarily, because my A6400 has the card in the battery slot, and many other cameras I have the card in the battery slot. My only problem with it is that the card is seated at basically the same height as the battery. So it's really super hard to get it, to press it down to pop it out. So I know that's so nitpicky, but I mean, it's hard to get the memory card out. I mean, that's kind of a bummer. I mean, but anyway, that's a brief look at the Fuji XS10. Again, in my opinion, it's going to be a great travel camera. I will compare it against these other three and make my decision coming up very shortly. But I think this is probably one of the best travel cameras that you can buy at this particular time. So join me next time when we'll be comparing stabilizations between these three cameras. And then we're going to do, just to take this series a little bit farther, we're also going to do a video on alternative cameras that I'm going to be taking on my vacation. And at the very end, we're going to summarize all the information that we've learned while going over these cameras, and I'll finally make a decision. And that's going to be the very last video of this series. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks for watching.